It was one of those afternoons that made everything feel lighter. Sunlight spilling across cafe tables, the smell of roasted coffee beans, the kind of laughter that only happens with someone who's known you for years. Camilla and I hadn't seen each other in months, and for a while, it felt like no time had passed. We talked about work, about family, about nothing and everything. And then, out of nowhere, she said it. So casually, it almost didn't register. "I'm glad you and David worked things out after that other woman." My world stopped mid-sip. For a second, I didn't even blink. I just stared at her, smile glued in place, while my heart began pounding so loudly I could barely hear the chatter around us. "What? What other woman?" I asked, trying to sound amused, like I was in on some joke. But she froze. Her face fell. "Oh God, Nora, I thought you already knew," she whispered, her spoon still in midair. The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, the laughter from other tables distant and hollow. She stumbled through an explanation. Something about Ethan's birthday party, about how David had gone alone and said we were working things out after he made a mistake. I remember that weekend clearly. He'd told me he was visiting his parents. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized he hadn't just lied. He'd rewritten our story. Forgiveness I never gave, spoken as truth. I pressed my shaking hands beneath the table, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah," I said softly. "We're fine now." But inside, something cracked open. Camilla kept apologizing, her words tumbling over themselves, but I barely heard her. My mind had already left the cafe, replaying every moment from that weekend. The smell of his cologne when he'd hugged me goodbye, the text he'd sent saying, "Mom made her famous lasagna." Now, even those words tasted like lies. I nodded and pretended to listen, but all I could feel was the slow, nauseating twist of betrayal sinking in. Not from the confession itself, but from realizing everyone else already knew. Everyone but me. When Camilla finally said she had to go, I hugged her, mechanical, rehearsed. Her perfume clung to my jacket, sweet and dizzying. "Take care, okay?" she murmured. I wanted to scream that I was fine, that nothing could shake me, but the truth sat heavy in my chest like wet cement. As she walked away, I stared at the half-empty cup between my hands, tracing the ring of coffee left on the table. Funny how something so ordinary could mark a moment when everything shifted, when your life splits cleanly into before and after. On the drive home, every red light felt endless. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel, restless, angry, terrified all at once. I kept thinking about that one phrase, the other woman. It rolled around in my head like a riddle I didn't want to solve. Who was she? How long had there been a her shadowing my life? By the time I reached our driveway, my smile was back in place, but my heart wasn't. I wasn't sure which scared me more, confronting the truth or pretending I didn't know it existed. When I stepped through the front door, everything looked exactly the same. The framed wedding photo on the console, his shoes by the mat, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the hallway. It was almost cruel how ordinary it all felt. I dropped my purse, took a deep breath, and smiled when I heard his voice calling from upstairs. That smile had become my best disguise. I answered softly, pretending nothing had changed, even though the truth was burning through me like fire under my skin. As I set the table for dinner, my hands moved automatically, knife, fork, napkin, plate, the rhythm familiar, mechanical. But my mind kept spiraling back to Camilla's words, the laughter in her tone before she realized what she'd said, the pity in her eyes after. I'd always thought betrayal would arrive like a storm, loud, violent, undeniable. I never imagined it would slip quietly into a sunny afternoon, hidden in a friend's careless remark. That night, as I lay beside David, his arm resting across my waist, I stared at the ceiling and counted the seconds between his breaths. Each one felt like a lie. I wanted to ask him, to demand the truth, but the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Instead, I whispered, "Good night," and waited in the dark, feeling the distance between us stretch like a quiet warning. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I'd start listening for what he wasn't saying. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, the soft rustle of sheets when David turned beside me. By morning, my exhaustion had disguised itself as calm. I made coffee, buttered toast, asked about his day, all while my mind replayed Camilla's words like a broken record. He smiled at me across the table, so effortlessly. That smile, the one that once made me feel safe, now looked like a mask I hadn't noticed before. When evening came, I told myself to act normal. Pretend. Wait. Patience had always been my strength, and now it was my armor. When he walked through the door, loosening his tie and kissing my cheek, I could feel my stomach tighten. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice steady, almost sweet. He talked about deadlines and traffic, never once realizing I was watching the small things, the twitch in his jaw, the way he avoided eye contact when I mentioned Ethan's birthday party. "Camilla said she saw you there," I said softly. "Alone." He froze, just for a second. But I saw it. The flicker of panic before he laughed it off. "Oh, that? I was just joking around," he said, waving a hand like it meant nothing. But his laugh didn't reach his eyes. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed still. I smiled and nodded, letting him believe I bought it. Inside, though, something began to shift. A quiet, cold certainty that the truth was closer than he wanted me to think. After dinner, I sat on the couch pretending to scroll through my phone while he flipped through channels. The laughter from the TV felt foreign, artificial, almost mocking. I studied him out of the corner of my eye. The relaxed posture, the way he scratched his chin, the small smirk he gave at nothing in particular. That was the thing about lies. They didn't always come with guilt written on the face. Sometimes they wore comfort like perfume. I realized then how much I'd mistaken ease for honesty. When he finally headed upstairs to shower, the silence that followed was deafening. My pulse hammered as I stared at his phone on the coffee table. I told myself I wasn't the kind of woman who snooped. That trust meant boundaries. But then I thought of Camilla's face, her regret, her pity. My hand moved before my conscience could stop it. I opened his messages, work chats, numbers, schedules, until one thread caught my eye. Work contacts. Except buried inside was a name I didn't recognize. Elisa. My breath caught. I tapped it open, heart thudding so hard it hurt. There they were, little blue bubbles filled with affection that wasn't mine. "Miss you already," she'd written. "Wish you were here instead of her." I stared at the words, unable to breathe. It wasn't the betrayal itself that shattered me. It was how casual it looked. Love turned into a text, typed between meetings. I set the phone down gently, as if it might explode. In a way, it already had. Right inside my chest. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the screen lighting up the room like a confession booth. Every word on that thread felt like a bruise I couldn't hide. I tried to piece together the timeline, when it started, where I'd been, what excuses I'd believed. Work trip. Late meeting. Traffic. Each one replayed in my head, small lies strung together to build a cage around my trust. And I'd lived inside it, decorating it with faith, with loyalty, with love that now felt humiliatingly one-sided. When I finally looked up, I caught my reflection in the black TV screen, pale, distant, almost unrecognizable. That woman staring back at me wasn't naive anymore. She was quiet, calculating, dangerous in her stillness. I thought of waking him up, of throwing the phone at his chest, demanding every ugly detail. But what would that give me? A performance. More lies, maybe tears, maybe promises. I didn't want his guilt. I wanted control. And control didn't come from chaos. So I slipped the phone back exactly where it was, every move deliberate, rehearsed. When he came out of the shower, towel around his neck, he smiled and kissed the top of my head. I smiled back. I even laughed when he told me something about work. He had no idea that while he dried his hair, I was memorizing every pattern of his deceit, preparing to turn his perfect little secret into a story he'd never forget. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to let him sleep, right through the calm before the storm. The next morning, I woke up with clarity so sharp it almost felt like peace. I made coffee, watched the sunrise filter through the kitchen blinds, and thought about how many mornings I'd started just like this, trusting, unaware. But now I had purpose. Revenge, I realized, didn't always come from rage. Sometimes, it came from precision. When he stepped out of the shower, humming, phone in hand, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. His little secret would lead him straight into his own undoing. While he brushed his teeth, I took his phone from the nightstand like I'd done it 1,000 times before. My fingers didn't even shake. I opened Elisa's chat and typed, "Dinner tonight? Same restaurant as last time, 7 p.m. For a heartbeat, I wondered if she'd hesitate, if guilt or caution might slow her down. But within seconds, her reply popped up. "Of course, can't wait, love." My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something colder. That word, love. How casually she'd stolen it. How easily he'd given it away. When I handed his phone back, I smiled. "You left this in the bathroom," I said, tone light, harmless. He thanked me and kissed my forehead before leaving for work, completely unaware that his downfall had already begun. As soon as the door shut, I sat at the table staring at the clock. The steady tick-tick-tick filled the silence like applause. Tonight, I thought, he'll walk into the same restaurant where I once waited for anniversaries. Only this time, I'd be waiting for something else entirely. All day I played the part, answering emails, smiling through small talk, pretending to be the same woman I'd been yesterday. But inside, everything had shifted. There was a steadiness in me I hadn't felt in years, like every heartbeat was marching toward one single purpose. Around noon, I sent him a quick text. "My boss scheduled a late meeting tonight. Don't wait up, okay?" His reply came seconds later. "Sure thing. I might just stay home and rest." Rest? The word almost made me laugh. He had no idea what kind of night he was walking into. By 6:30, I was sitting in my car outside the restaurant, engine off, heart steady. The sky was dimming, and the lights from the building cast golden reflections on the windshield. I wrapped a dark scarf around my neck, the fabric soft against my skin, a strange comfort in the tension. I'd chosen a corner table earlier that afternoon, the perfect spot, close enough to see, far enough to disappear. My phone camera was ready, every detail planned. I wasn't nervous, I was focused, controlled. Calm, like a storm that had studied its target. At exactly 7, I saw her. Elisa. She looked younger than I expected, polished, confident, wearing the kind of perfume you only wear for someone who isn't yours. My breath slowed as she scanned the room, her smile blooming when she spotted him. David walked in seconds later, the same man I'd kissed goodbye this morning, his hand sliding into hers as if that was his true home. I felt nothing, no jealousy, no heartbreak, just clarity. "You should have picked a darker restaurant," I whispered to myself. "The lighting's perfect for evidence." They sat across from each other, laughing softly, completely unaware of the quiet woman tucked into the corner with her phone angled just right. I watched as his hand slid across the table, covering hers, their fingers intertwining like a secret handshake, the kind you only learn by betraying someone else. The camera lens caught every gesture, the tilt of his head, the way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the smile that used to belong to me. Each second I recorded felt like reclaiming something he'd stolen. Not love, but power. The waiter poured them wine. I zoomed in, steady as ever. A part of me wondered if he felt any flicker of guilt, any pulse of conscience. But looking at him, relaxed and charming, I realized he didn't. He wasn't ashamed, just comfortable in his deception. That truth hurt more than the affair itself. It wasn't just that he'd chosen someone else. It was that he'd done it without hesitation, without remorse, as if I were already a fading detail in his story. That realization sharpened me in ways I didn't know I could be. When they finally stood to leave, I ended the recording and took a slow sip of the water I hadn't touched all night. The ice had melted, the glass sweating against my fingers. I left some bills on the table, not for the service, for the performance. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt strangely calm. Revenge wasn't a scream or a slap. It was this: a quiet walk to my car, the sound of my heels on the pavement, and the knowledge that tomorrow, the game would shift, and this time, I'd be the one writing the script. By the time David came home that night, I was already waiting, sitting on the couch, lights dimmed, phone resting in my hand like an unspoken threat. The sound of his keys in the door felt louder than usual. "Hey," he said casually, setting down his briefcase. "I thought you had that late meeting." I smiled, keeping my tone light. "I did. It was enlightening." He froze for a fraction of a second, that subtle twitch in his jaw giving him away. "You okay?" he asked, trying to sound concerned. I nodded. "Perfectly." He walked closer, still oblivious to the storm waiting just beneath my calm. "Just watched a movie," I said, lifting the phone. "Want to see the highlights?" I connected it to the TV before he could answer. And then, there it was. Him. Her. The restaurant. The laughter. His hand over hers. For a long, heavy moment, he said nothing. I watched the color drain from his face as his perfect little narrative cracked in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice shook. "Nora, I can explain." I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how many times I'd believed those words before. "Then do it," I said quietly. "Explain how you had dinner with your business contact while holding her hand. Explain how I became the woman in your alibi story." He opened his mouth, stammered something about a mistake, but I cut him off. "No, David. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't find out. Everything after that, that was a decision." My voice was calm, almost gentle. His eyes filled with panic. Mine? With clarity. He reached for me, like he always did when words failed him. A habit that once made me feel safe, now only made my skin crawl. "Nora, please," he said, voice trembling. "You have to believe me." I stepped back, every movement deliberate. "Believe you?" I repeated, almost amused. "After watching you touch her like that? After hearing her call you love?" His lips parted, but nothing came out. I'd seen him lie before, but this was different. He was caught in his own story, drowning in it, still trying to make me his audience. For years, I'd been the one smoothing over his mistakes, turning sharp edges into forgiveness. Tonight I let the silence stretch between us. Cold, unforgiving, honest. He finally sank onto the couch, head in his hands, muttering something about how it meant nothing. I tilted my head. "Nothing?" I asked softly. "You risked everything for nothing?" My voice wasn't angry, it was steady, surgical. Because I knew he wanted my tears. He wanted me broken, begging, emotional. But all he got was calm. And calm terrified him more than rage ever could. When he finally looked up, eyes glistening, I almost pitied him. Almost. "What do you want me to say?" he whispered. I met his gaze. "Nothing," I said. "I've already heard enough lies for one lifetime." I unplugged the phone, set it down on the coffee table, and walked toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard him call my name, once, twice, desperation creeping into every syllable. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Truth, it turned out, wasn't what broke me. It was what finally set me free. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand gliding along the railing, each step grounding me in a strange, hollow calm. Behind me, I could still hear him, pacing, muttering excuses, pleading into the empty air. I didn't answer. I didn't even glance back. There's something intoxicating about silence when you've spent years explaining yourself to someone who never really listened. In that moment, my quiet felt louder than any scream. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't hate. It was something sharper, indifference wrapped in control. When I reached the bedroom, I paused at the doorway and looked inside. The bed we'd shared now looked foreign, like a stage where every scene had been a performance. I noticed the framed photo of us on the dresser, smiling on a beach, all sun and illusion. I picked it up, stared for a second, and then laid it face down. That sound, the soft thud of glass against wood, felt final. Downstairs, his voice cracked under the weight of his own lies. For once, he was the one losing sleep. I changed into pajamas, brushed my hair, and slipped into bed. Not to rest, but to plan. He still thought this was the worst night of his life. He had no idea it was just the beginning. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle into uneasy quiet. Tomorrow, I'd make sure his world learned the truth he'd tried to hide. Betrayal had rewritten me, but not as a victim. I was becoming something far stronger, and he would see it soon enough. 2 days later, I walked into David's office building as if I belonged there. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a metronome of calm control. I wore the navy suit he'd once said made me look too serious. That made it perfect. The receptionist smiled politely, assuming I was there for him. In a way, I was. When I reached the conference room, I saw him through the glass wall, mid-presentation, the same polished confidence that once fooled me now fooling everyone else. For the last time. I waited for the right moment, the pause after his joke, the ripple of polite laughter. Then I opened the door. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice smooth, pleasant. "I just came to drop off something for my husband." Heads turned. David froze. I walked in slowly, placed a slim folder on the table, and smiled. "You'll want to keep this. It's for HR." His colleagues exchanged curious glances as I turned to leave. Inside the folder, screenshots, the video, and a single note written in neat cursive. It's always good to document employee conduct. The silence that followed was exquisite. I didn't need to stay to see his face. I could feel the dread from across the room. By the time the door shut behind me, I'd already stopped trembling. For months, he'd told lies so smooth they'd sounded like love. Now, the truth had its turn, and it didn't stutter. As I walked back through the lobby, sunlight spilled through the glass, catching the gold on my wedding band. I slipped it off and dropped it into my purse. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. That evening, when he finally came home, I was already packing his things. The house felt different now. Lighter, quieter, as if it had been holding its breath too. He walked in without a word, his tie loose, his pride shattered. "Nora, please," he said, voice cracking. You didn't have to humiliate me. I looked up from the suitcase and met his eyes. You humiliated yourself, I said softly. I just made sure everyone else saw what I already knew. He flinched, as if the truth itself had weight. He started pacing, muttering about mistakes, about fixing things, about how I'd taken it too far. I folded another shirt and placed it neatly on top of the pile. You lied to me, I said, my tone calm but unyielding. You embarrassed me. You made me question my own reality. So no, David, this isn't too far. This is fair. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me, realizing that the woman he'd underestimated had turned into something unrecognizable, something untouchable. When the last suitcase was zipped, I handed him his car keys. You can stay with her, I said. Or with whoever's next. Either way, it won't be here. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I watched him walk out. No tears, no shouting, no goodbye. Just the quiet click of the door closing behind him. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. It sounded like freedom, like peace finding its way back home. I didn't look back. I'd already done enough of that. After he left, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of nothingness. The walls seemed to breathe differently, softer, freer. I picked up one of his forgotten cufflinks from the floor, small and shiny, a perfect symbol of the man who'd always cared more about appearances than honesty. I turned it over in my hand once before dropping it into the trash. It made a dull sound as it hit the bottom, final and satisfying. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. About me. That night, I opened the windows and let the cool air wash through the house. The scent of rain drifted in, clean and new. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like a pulse. Every sip felt like a small celebration, not of revenge, but of survival. There was still pain, yes, but it no longer ruled me. It was background noise now, fading beneath something brighter. My own voice, steady and clear, returning after years of silence. Before going to bed, I took one last look around, at the space that had once held so many lies, now stripped bare and honest. Tomorrow I'd start again. Maybe new furniture, maybe new walls, maybe a whole new city. But tonight, I just wanted stillness. I wanted to feel what freedom truly sounded like, the soft hum of peace settling in after the storm. And as I turned off the lights, I realized the revenge was never really against him. It was against the version of me who thought I'd never leave. Months later, I found myself back at the same cafe where everything had begun. Sunlight spilling through the windows, the hum of conversation, the smell of coffee that once felt like comfort and now felt like victory. Camilla waved from our usual table, her smile genuine this time. You look different, she said as I sat down. I laughed softly. Do I? She nodded. You seem free. I smiled, stirring my coffee. I am. Turns out the other woman did me a favor. She handed me back my piece. And for the first time, I meant it. We talked for hours, about work, travel, even silly things that didn't matter. But under it all, there was a quiet current of gratitude. Not for what had happened, but for what it had taught me. Betrayal had been a brutal teacher, but it had also been a mirror, showing me everything I'd forgotten about myself. I was stronger now. Softer, too, in the ways that mattered. I didn't carry bitterness. I carried boundaries. And when the conversation faded into laughter, I realized I hadn't thought about David once. Just as we were finishing, my phone buzzed. An email notification lit up the screen. Job offer confirmed. Relocation approved. My heart fluttered. Not from fear this time, but from possibility. I looked out the window at the sunlight filtering through the trees and took a deep breath. The world felt open again, unruined. As I gathered my things, I thought, he taught me betrayal. I taught him consequence. Then, as I walked away from the cafe and into the bright afternoon, a single thought lingered. Calm, unshakable, true. He made me the woman in his lie. I became the truth that ruined his story.